Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on, well, a really critical mission, I think. We're diving into the sources about the Bosnian Genocide. It's a conflict, a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing in the 90s that really challenges our assumptions about modern Europe after World War II. Our goal today is to get into the mechanics of it all. The atrocities, specifically against Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, as Yugoslavia broke apart. We need to understand not just what happened, but how. How did decades of relative peace just dissolve into mass murder?
That's the crucial question. And to answer it, we really have to start before 1992. What was Bosnia and Herzegovina like then? The sources we've looked at, they all stress this point. This wasn't some land simmering with ancient hatreds just waiting to boil over. Not really. It was actually described quite often as a kind of model of multi-ethnic harmony, especially in cities like Sarajevo. You had Orthodox Serbs, Catholic Croats, and a large Muslim population, the Bosniaks, living side by side, that we were neighbors, colleagues. And this is key. Intermarriage rates were high. Identity was often more fluid. People might identify as Yugoslav or Bosnian before emphasizing Serb, Croat, or Muslim.
Okay, that context is absolutely vital. Because if it was that tolerant, that integrated, then the central question really is stark. How does that collapse? How does it fall apart so quickly, so violently, into what's been called the last European genocide? Let's try and unpack that, starting with the nationalism.
Right. The initial spark was political. You had the fall of communism, the whole Yugoslav Federation starting to crumble. And as that central authority weakened, it created this dangerous power vacuum.
And into that vacuum stepped nationalist leaders, right? Particularly Serbian nationalists in Belgrade, and importantly among Bosnian Serbs themselves. They didn't see an opportunity for, say, democracy. They saw a chance to carve out ethnically pure states.
Exactly. And this wasn't some spontaneous popular uprising. It was very much engineered from the top down. Our sources are quite clear on this. The groundwork was laid by relentless state-controlled media propaganda day after day, systematically dehumanizing Bosniaks, painting them as some kind of historical enemy and existential threat, turning neighbors against neighbors.
Sowing paranoia where there hadn't necessarily been widespread paranoia before.
Precisely. Generations had lived together. This fear had to be manufactured, amplified.
And that propaganda directly paved the way for the military action. So Bosnia declares independence in 1992.
Following a referendum, yes. Fiercely opposed by the Bosnian Serb leadership.
And almost immediately, Bosnian Serb forces, led by figures like Radovan Karadzic politically and Ratko Mladic militarily, they launched this full-scale assault.
And crucially, they weren't alone. They had massive support from what was left of the old Yugoslav People's Army, the JNA.
Which means they had the heavy weapons, tanks, artillery.
An overwhelming advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So it quickly became clear this wasn't a symmetrical civil war. It was something else. The goal wasn't just political control. It was what became known as ethnic cleansing, a terrifyingly bureaucratic term for a brutal reality.
Trying to literally erase a whole group of people from their historic lands.
Through terror, forced displacement, and ultimately elimination. And the primary targets were the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosniaks.
And the methods were just devastatingly comprehensive. Homes burned, okay, but also specifically targeting mosques, libraries, cultural centers.
Yes, destroying the very anchors of community life, of cultural memory, making it impossible, or at least traumatic, for people to ever imagine returning.
So this brutality, this systematic approach, it seems to unfold along two main tracks. The cities under siege and then the camps.
That's a good way to put it. Two fronts of horror, really. The siege of Sarajevo became the global symbol.
Nearly 4 years. It's staggering. The longest siege of a capital city in modern history.
Think about that. Over 1,400 days. Cut off, no electricity, no water, constant danger.
That image of people running across Sniper Alley just to get basic necessities, under fire.
And the shelling was indiscriminate. It hit everyone. Serbs, Croats, Muslims who remained in the city. The goal wasn't just military, it was terror. Psychological warfare.
To break the spirit of the city.
Exactly. To make life unbearable. Force people to flee or submit.
But while Sarajevo was this visible, drawn-out agony, you mentioned the camps, that sounds even more systematic, maybe.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
While Sarajevo was horrific, the camps like Omarska, Trnopolje, Karada, they represented the industrial scale of the ethnic cleansing. These were set up mainly to process the Bosniak population rounded up from towns and villages overrun by Bosnian Serb forces.
Okay, so who were they targeting specifically within those captured communities? Was it just random men, or?
It wasn't random. The sources highlight a deliberate pattern. Yes, ordinary men were rounded up in huge numbers, but there was a specific focus on targeting the local elite. We're talking doctors, teachers, lawyers, religious leaders, businessmen, local politicians.
So destroying the leadership, the potential organizers.
Precisely. Destroying the community's brain trust, its social fabric, ensuring no effective resistance or organized return could happen. And inside those camps, thousands faced torture, starvation, beatings, sexual assault, and summary executions. It was hellish.
And then those images leaked out, the emaciated men behind barbed wire.
Yes. When journalists like Roy Gutman and Ed Voyemi managed to get access and report, and those photos were published, it shocked the world. It was this jarring echo of the Holocaust, happening again in Europe, half a century later. The systematic nature, the dehumanization, it was undeniable.
It's hard to comprehend, and this level of organized cruelty, the camps, it seems like a precursor to the absolute darkest moment, doesn't it, Srebrenica?
Srebrenica is. It's the horrifying pinnacle of the entire campaign, and it's wrapped in this profound sense of betrayal.
Because it was supposed to be safe, right? A UN-safe area.
Exactly. Declared safe by the UN Security Council. Thousands of Bosniaks, mostly women, children, and elderly, but also men of fighting age, had fled there seeking refuge.
Believing they were under international protection.
They were supposed to be. But in July 1995, Bosnian Serb forces under General Mladic just rolled in, overran the town.
What about the UN peacekeepers? The Dutch battalion?
They were vastly outnumbered, lightly armed, and their mandate was ambiguous, fatally so. They were essentially abandoned by the international community, given an impossible task without the means to achieve it. They were overwhelmed.
And then the separation.
Yes. Mladic's forces systematically separated the men and boys deemed of military age from the women, children, and elderly. Over the next few days, more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys were taken to execution sites in the surrounding fields and forests and murdered. Systematically.
8,000 in a few days.
It's the single largest mass murder in Europe since the Second World War. And international courts, later on, ruled unequivocally that this was an act of genocide.
Srebrenica just throws the international failure into such sharp relief. You see the reports from the sieges, the camps. Why was the response for years so hesitant, so inadequate?
It's a painful question with complex answers. The sources point to several things. There was initial confusion, perhaps willful confusion, about whether it was just a civil war or actual genocide. Major powers were reluctant to commit ground troops, remembering Vietnam, fearing a quagmire in the Bosnian mountains.
And the UN itself seemed paralyzed.
The UN mandate was often interpreted as traditional peacekeeping, a peace that didn't exist, rather than peace enforcement, which would mean taking sides, protecting civilians forcefully. This hesitation, this lack of clear, decisive action, it sent a terrible signal.
It gave the perpetrators a green light, essentially, a sense of impunity.
That's how it appears. They likely interpreted the international inaction as tacit permission to continue, perhaps even escalate.
Until Srebrenica, that seemed to be the breaking point.
Srebrenica, combined with another horrific marketplace bombing in Sarajevo shortly after, finally seemed to galvanize a stronger response.
That led to the NATO bombing campaign.
Yes, Operation Deliberate Force, a sustained NATO air campaign against Bosnian Serb military positions. That pressure, combined with gains by the Bosnian and Croat armies on the ground, finally forced the Bosnian Serb leadership to the negotiating table.
Which brings us to Dayton, Ohio. The Dayton Accords, signed in late 1995.
That's right. The agreement that officially ended the war. It stopped the killing, which was obviously paramount.
But the structure it created, it's often described as incredibly complex, even fragile. It didn't exactly reunite the country, did it?
No, quite the opposite in many ways. The Dayton Accords essentially stopped the fighting by, well, freezing the front lines and enshrining the ethnic divisions that the war had created into the country's political and legal framework.
How does that work in practice?
It partitioned Bosnia into two main entities, highly autonomous: the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, mostly Bosniaks and Croats, and the Republika Srpska, predominantly Serb. On top of that, you have an incredibly complex constitutional structure, a three-member presidency rotating between a Bosniak, a Croat, and a Serb. Multiple layers of government, ethnic quotas, veto powers everywhere.
Sounds like a recipe for gridlock.
It often is. It's extremely costly, bureaucratic, and makes decisive governance very difficult. While it achieved the immediate goal piece, many sources argue it cemented the wartime divisions.
Making reconciliation harder, maybe?
Potentially, yes. It didn't really incentivize integration or overcoming those ethnic lines that the war had so brutally enforced. It remains, as you said, fragile.
But amidst that complex political legacy, there's the issue of justice. Accountability. That seems like one area where there was significant international action eventually.
Yes, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia,
Hmm.
the ICTY, based in The Hague, that was a major undertaking.
And key figures were brought to trial.
They were. It took years, sometimes decades. But high-level perpetrators like Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic were eventually captured, tried, and convicted for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes.
Establishing important legal precedent.
Absolutely. The ICTY's work was crucial in legally establishing the facts, including the determination that genocide occurred at Srebrenica and holding individuals accountable at the highest levels. It sent a message, however delayed.
So, looking back at the whole picture,
Hmm.
what's the enduring legacy? What does this teach us?
I mean, the Bosnian genocide stands as this stark, terrible reminder that even in modern Europe, seemingly stable societies can collapse into, well, into unspeakable violence fueled by nationalism and engineered hatred. For Muslims around the world, it was also a profoundly painful experience. Seeing a European Muslim community targeted so brutally and the slowness of the international response, it highlighted vulnerabilities and the critical importance of solidarity in speaking out against injustice everywhere.
It underscores that need for early action, doesn't it? Addressing the dehumanizing rhetoric before it leads to violence.
Exactly. Don't wait until the mass graves are being uncovered. The warning signs were there.
So to recap our deep dive, we've seen the shocking collapse of a multi-ethnic society driven by toxic nationalism and propaganda. We've seen the systematic use of terror sieges, camps, mass murder, and a devastating failure of international will, culminating in the genocide at Srebrenica. And finally, a peace agreement, Dayton, that stopped the war but left behind a deeply complex and divided political structure.
Right. And the Dayton Accords, while ending the bloodshed, really solidified those divisions. The sources emphasize how it rewarded the military outcome, partitioning the country along ethnic lines, decentralizing power significantly, and that leaves us, and leaves you, with a really important lingering question. Can a political system that's so complex, so fragile, and fundamentally built on codifying ethnic division, can that structure truly facilitate the deep, long-term healing needed after genocide? Can it reunite a society where nationalism is, in effect, baked into the Constitution?
A heavy question indeed, and one that Bosnia continues to grapple with today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a difficult but essential history, and for reflecting on the resilience of people who faced erasure but endured.